So first off, I'm going to ask each person to introduce themselves very briefly and just say something about why you're here, like what is your connection with this topic, which is making money and working with nature. So starting at this end of the table and moving along, just 1 minute or so each.
I'm Willie White. So I'm an organic regenerative dairy farmer, I guess, from Ashley Clinton in Central Hawke's Bay. I'm also a trustee on the Hawke's Bay Future Farming Trust. I guess this topic is dear to my heart because, a lot of the changes, I guess, that we've looked to make have been, really driven by the economics. So, and also, I was a last minute stitch up because John Camp couldn't make it, so.
Hey everybody, my name's Sam, and we're organic regenerative farmers in the Manawatu. Currently predominantly dairy, but we previous seasons we've grown quite a few vegetables as well, and just a few beefies on the side. I guess why I'm here today is I think we provide a good example of turning around a high input and highly leveraged farming system to a profitable and a sustainable regenerative system, and over sort of a course of 6 or 7 years it's standing up in the current economic climate, which is very good.
Paul Smith. I started life as a sheep and beef farmer, and I couldn't understand what Dad was doing on the farm, so I went and got an ag degree stayed sheep and beef farming till I was about 30, and then moved to growing asparagus and apples, which have been for around 25 years, I suppose, and then the last 14 years been involved with Phil and Phyllis in Abron, helping farmers improve their soil health and soil nutrition, and finding better systems for growing produce effectively and efficiently. I suppose I've seen some very rapid changes in soil health, which I didn't think would happen. My university training tells me that those are decadal changes that I was observing, and within a year, which surprised me. I didn't realise that we could change soils that quickly. So I'm here to talk about some of that.
Hi everybody, I'm John King. I'm from Christchurch. I'm an adult educator. I work with a network of farmers called the Curious Cockies from Northland to Southland. In fact, we've got a group meeting tomorrow at Willie White's place. If you want to come and join us at 1 o'clock, you'd be much welcome. We're looking for new members, so all good. I'm here because I've been commenting on this space for the best part of 20 years. And I've just written a book called Curiosity, Farmers Discovering What Works. You can come and have a chat with me afterwards about that. That's largely about farmers that have gone down the path of taking industry information, and for whatever reason it hasn't worked for them. So what have they been doing next? That's what the stories are all about. So that's probably why I'm here today. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Now, we had primed the speakers with 5 specific questions, but I'm going to throw a curved ball at you based on a conversation during the break. And the person who asked the last question, what's a New Zealand perspective on what we heard Steve just say? So would any of you be prepared to respond to that question? What's your perspective on what's going on in New Zealand relative to what Steve was talking about? You can raise your hand if you've got an answer to that question. Okay, Paul, take it away. Paul, you may just need to move slightly close to your mic, or move it slightly close to you.
Well, like I just said, we have seen some fairly rapid changes in soil health, and by that I mean changes in porosity, the ease with which the roots can move through the soil, the amount of roots in the soil, and the depth that they go to. And those changes have just been mainly through not mucking up the soil so much with heavy use of chemicals, trying to avoid compaction through over-cultivation or pugging, and growing a fairly heavy cover over the soil, so a good solar panel up there that's pumping carbon down into the plant root system. Something that I never understood about plant systems till Phyllis explained it to me was, so Phyllis, raise your hand please. If you don't know Phyllis, one of the greatest influences of soil health in Hawke's Bay, and thanks very much for your help over the years. But I didn't realise that plants actually pump some of their valuable photosynthate that they produce to produce stems and shoots and grow, that they actually gave some of that to the soil system to help the soil system survive and feed them. So you have a system where plants feed the soil and the soil feeds the plants. So we try not to muck up with that system too much by throwing heavy chemicals at it, and treat the soil a bit nicely. Make sure it's got plenty of solar panel to pump that carbon into the system so the microbes are healthy and feed the plants, and make sure we look after them. It's really probably the key thing that's going on. In terms of what Steve's doing, we're seeing similar changes, and perhaps even bigger in soil carbon. So Phil and I, when we started this back in 2008, we wanted to convince ourselves that the changes that we were seeing in soil, we could actually measure its soil carbon, because it looked to us like we should be able to measure that. And it turned out that it was one of the only things out there that wasn't a repeatable empirical measure of what we were seeing in the soil. That those depth changes that we were seeing in the soil and colour and improvement in rooting depth and things like that were measurable as increases in soil carbon.
Okay, thank you, Paul. John, did you want to add something briefly to that?
I think there's a lot of tension goes on between people that are doing supposedly the right thing, like what people are doing in this room, versus what's happening in the industry. I think a lot of the time we're seeing groups talk past each other, and I think in the long run what we're going to find is that there's a lot of reasonably progressive farmers out there that are doing regenerative practices, and that's I think that but there's also an industry that, and you know, Mike mentioned about this ecosystem of consultants, but I don't see the industry really talking down this line as, you know, we just saw a minute ago with Steve, for example. I don't see that happening. It's not happening yet. And maybe there needs to be maybe there's a, you know, Phil Ware's talking about creating a change in the way the industry bodies are structured. Maybe that might give us an opportunity to actually get some more traction within the established networks where the power is about making change.
Yeah, good point. And it was just recently myself, I suggested that I might use the term regenerative farming when talking to a bunch of farmers, and I was told, steer clear of that term, you'll turn them off, there'll be a backlash. So there you go. Okay, I'm going to jump to what was question 2 on the list. And the question is, how do you personally, in your farming system, balance the demands of running a commercial farming system and being a good caretaker of the environment / working with nature? Willie, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think my learnings are that those two things go hand in hand. I think, you know, Barry Ridler says, you know, if you look after the economics, then the environment will follow, and I do truly believe that. So, you know, in our situation, you know, we've gone from a sort of 1,400 cow conventional dairy operation down to about 1,000 cows, and what we've learned is that the marginal cost of farming those additional animals and striving for that sort of industry average production far outweighed the benefit. So yeah, we're seeing it as actually just running a more robust, you know, financial performance. And obviously we've taken 400 cows out of the catchment, and we're not suffering from the same sort of stresses that we used to, regardless of the inevitable variability in weather and all those other external factors that we used to kind of blame for everything. We can now just ride them out a bit better. I think, like I say, I think the environment follows if you get the economics right. That's certainly the case in our context.
Great. So you're saying you've actually decreased your stocking numbers, but you haven't seen any economic loss as a result of that?
No, we're far more profitable now than what we were. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Sam?
Very much echo what Willie said. Budgeting is so important. You need to know what's happening, and you've got to be looking at the whole picture. You can't just be focusing on production. You've got to look at net profit and what's your big levers to pull. But you've also got to come to, I guess, is the lines that you won't cross, and get to sort of get them clear in your mind, because it depends on where you've come from. I guess I'm fortunate enough to not have sort of been institutionalised with farming, so I came in pretty fresh, and I came at it through a sort of a principles approach rather than having done it for a long time and knowing different things I could do and get away with, or different products you could use. So I had those lines pretty firm to begin with, which helped, but and to be honest, having the organic standard actually helps with that as well, because it just rules out so much things. And I think that's where regenerative can get quite confusing and mind-boggling, is when there's just so many options, so many different ways to do things, and if you do fall back to your old ways, you may not have given the system the time it needed to prove itself. An example is when sowing a new paddock or something like that, then I'll always give it at least a year before I make a full assessment on whether it's been a good outcome or a bad outcome. And I think that goes for. I think that's a general theme to take, is that you've just got to start to look at things so much more holistically. And as Willie said, is that the environment. If you look after the environment, it will look after you. Your bank balance. And as stated before, we run quite a small block of land, and we've got $4.5 million of debt on 150 hectares. So it's a highly leveraged operation, and this season we're looking at 9.7% interest. So you can do the figures on that, and we're still paying principal off, and so economically it can pay off and be an environmental outcome, and I think that's the thing, is that we shouldn't have to trade one off for the other.
Okay, thanks Sam. And Paul and John, I'm aware you're not actually running a farming, you're not farmers yourselves, you're not running a farming system, but you are closely involved working with farmers and advising them. Have you got anything to add from your experience to this question?
On pastoral farms, I think managing your soils well is just fundamental to growing an efficient production system, really. Plants need to survive in an environment where they can get their roots down, where they have access to as much of the soil as possible, where they have access to all the minerals and water that you can possibly provide them. So it's just good fundamentals, really.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, Rod, I'm just going to take this just a little bit wider because I think there's a huge opportunity that's being missed in agricultural education. Some of you might notice in one of Steve's slides, he had a slide up there with the grazing. He was talking about the 4 ecosystem processes, and I've just got a little wee diagram here, a little wee demonstration here I'm just going to do with those. So these are the 4 ecosystem processes that how the land functions. Okay, so there's the water cycle, which you'll be aware of, and the mineral cycle. There's a thing called community dynamics, which is all about the ever-changing patterns of biodiversity. And then there's energy flow, which is about the harvesting of sunlight, right? Because as growers and farmers, you're all second-hand sunbeam salespeople, isn't that right? That's what you do, right? Okay. And you can see that each one's got a little window because you can use each of these processes to look into the ecosystem to see how it's functioning. And the reason that they're in a cube like this is that they all reflect each other. If you influence the water cycle, for example, then it will simultaneously influence the other three processes at the same time, instantly. Now, where do you fit in? If you're a land manager or a landowner, you fit right in here, right in the middle, okay? Along with your family and your mates and your business and your farm and your community. And if we squeeze just one of these ecosystem processes and the others will squeeze in with it, guess what happens? You get squeezed. You get squeezed environmentally, you get squeezed socially, and you get squeezed financially. So one of the things that I ask farmers is that when you're spending money, okay, and you're dealing with a problem, you need to ask this question, okay? If you take this action, will it address the root cause of the problem, or are you going to be just treating a symptom? Understanding these processes helps you get to the root causes of problems, because if you end up treating symptoms all the time, you end up on what's called an addictive spending regime, which means the benefit you get from taking that action declines, while the amount of money it takes to address it often increases. And that means that you get on, like I said, an addictive spending regime that's going to affect your bottom line. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move now to the question about biodiversity, because we've had less discussion perhaps on that today than we have on managing soils. So the question is, how important is biodiversity to your farming system? And do you actively monitor biodiversity on your farm to gauge what difference you are making? Does anybody want to go first on that one? Otherwise, we'll start with Willie. Yep, take it away.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. And when we started this journey, you know, we realised that pasture diversity was a big driver of how we could run a system profitably. So we've spent a fair bit, you know, introducing pasture diversity, but yeah, I think probably the more important thing is diversity in the soil. So and different pastures and root architectures, etc., obviously have an impact on the diversity of microorganisms. But yeah, so that to me is what it's come down to. But I've also realised as well that, you know, management practices over time, you know, help to bring about that as well. So yeah, we probably spent a lot of money trying to get there, and now we're probably realising actually I'm quite comfortable not disturbing the soil anymore and letting nature take its course. So yeah, not really a great answer, but yeah, I think the biodiversity is important. We're not measuring it necessarily, but obviously we're observing it every day. But yeah, like I say, it's what's happening under the soil that I think is the real key. And I think the beauty of coming into a system like this is that, yeah, you sort of trust that by adapting your management practices and your inputs and so on, you're actually working on improving that natural capacity over time. And yeah, to me that's huge, and I'll admit now when I look back that I believe under our old system and in our old practices that we were probably deteriorating our natural capacity doing that. So, you know, that gives us hope, I guess, for the future.
Awesome, thanks Willie. Sam?
I just want to build on that point of Willie's in terms of biodiversity of the soil. That's the thing. I think we can often get quite caught up in biodiversity being, you know, trees and birds and that side of things, and we forget about the, you know, microscopic life forms and what a large portion of, you know, planet's life form that they make up, and we're just completely forgetting about them. So, I mean, for us, yeah, biodiversity is extremely important, but we do have we've got the anecdotes of the skylarks coming back, and we've got the frogs coming back that we lost once before on the farm. But that adage of, life begets life, that, you focus on the microscopic forms of life and nurture those and create the conditions for that, and the food chain will follow, and that's the way I like to look at it.
Thanks, Sam. Paul?
I'm probably along the lines of both the previous speakers. Phyllis and Phil and I and Abron have focused very hard on soil visual assessments as a way of monitoring biodiversity and the soil life and trying to get a handle on whether we're improving or degrading that system. And thanks very much to Phyllis for teaching me how to do a VSA properly. I knew the physical aspects of soil texture and structure and how porous it was and things like that, but I didn't really understand how to measure the biological component of it. I wasn't taught that very well at university. So I came out of university thinking I knew something and continue to find out that I don't know much. So things like the soil smell, which kind of got scoffed at originally, what a good, your nose is a very good tool for telling you how good anything is, and applied to the soil, it's very good at telling us whether the soil's biologically active or not. It's just a matter of calibrating your sensory tool to be able to recognise it and record it in a decent sort of scoring system. And similarly, looking at roots, whether they're brown or white, they're new or they're dead, are pretty important. How far they go through the soil, how deep the topsoil is, are all important things that we weren't measuring properly before that we started to measure properly, and they give us good indications of how healthy that soil is, what the biodiversity is like, whether it's working properly. Clover nodules, how deep they are. We've got a system that's trying to breed clovers with longer root systems at the moment, but we find in soils that are good, we've got existing clovers in our pastures that have got clover roots down past 200 mils that have got nodules the full length of their roots. It's all possible if you let the soil do it.
Thanks, Paul. Well, that's a new one. So the sniff test applies to soil as well as to other things we might want to assess the quality of. Yeah. Why not soil? John?
One of the stories in my book talks about a good mentor of mine down south, and he spent 40 years doing his own research. And what he does is that he sets aside about 10% of his farm, and that's where he does all his breeding trials, his grazing trials, cropping trials, drenching trials, everything. Been doing that now for 45 years, okay? And the whole point of doing that is that you find out what doesn't work. And that's the real guts of it, right? And the other point of that too is that you've got to realise that both you and your farm aren't designed in a laboratory. Okay, you're going to handle things differently, and your farm's going to handle things differently to the property next door, and that's going to depend on your appetite for risk. Okay, I've come across people that won't do anything more over 2 hectares, and I've got other guys that'll do 350 in one go. It just depends on your attitude to risk. With this mentor of mine, he suggests that you put no more than 6% of your income into an account called the Toys and Development account. Okay, you don't want to be using traditional categories for this kind of stuff, right? And so that's because you don't want to be running an overdraft for this either, okay? Because if it goes tits up, then you want nothing worse than you've got something that doesn't work, and that's going to cost you in terms of interest, right? So there's a couple of little things there to be thinking about if you want to go down this path, because even though the guys up here have had incredible examples, and there's some really cool examples in my book, I can guarantee the minute you go and do it yourself, the weather will change, or the markets will change, or your tractor will throw a piston or whatever it is, and it won't work for you, for whatever that is, okay? So you've just got to give yourself enough opportunity to develop experience, okay? The drama about being young is that you can't teach the young old tricks, right? There's nothing beats experience. So if you're going to run a trial Find an area on your farm where you're going to do it. You've got to run it for 3 years because the first year will lie to you, the climate will be different and all the rest, that kind of thing. And that's how you go about doing it, okay? Just some real simple, basic stuff.
And that's a great segue into the final question that I'm going to ask the panel, because I do want to allow a decent amount of time for questions. And so for the final question, I'd like you to be really succinct with your answer. The question is, what advice would you give? What is the key piece of advice that you would give to others who want to start out or move along on this journey of balancing nature with profitability? And actually, we'll start with you, start from the other end of the table this time. So you're first, John.
It's a bit of a, I mean, if you simply want to invest and improve the value of your property, plant a tree, okay? Around the globe, the most valuable rural landscapes are the English hedgerow and the African savanna, okay? And that'll lift the value of your property. It'll certainly make your property sell faster, okay? You'll attract better staff because it'll look attractive, particularly women, okay? They like trees. They're not worried what colour your tractor is or how much horsepower it's got, okay? Okay? And
We'll let that one pass, just.
Well, maybe they do, I don't know. Yeah. Another thing too that'll tickle your pink as well is that if you're struggling financially, and I don't know, ask your partner to run the business. A bit spooky, isn't it? But you go and ask some consultants around, okay? If hubby dies and wifey takes over the books and takes over the business, it's not unusual for the business position to improve. And that's because women often come into farming and they don't have the same traditions and cultures and other things, preferences that bind them to doing particular things that quite often are costing the business money. So be mindful of that. There's an opportunity there. The best hearing aid for a man is a woman. She's just across the other side of the bed. So be mindful of that, okay? Just there.
Thank you. And just to put in a word for the women, because we are underrepresented, at least in speakers today, on studies that I've read about cures for poverty, $1 in the hands of a woman goes a lot further than $1 in the hands of a man. Okay. Your turn, Paul.
Yeah, I don't know what to say following that. My sole piece of advice, probably, believe the power of your own observations. Really, we get talked out of believing in ourselves quite a bit by what our neighbours think and by what the consultants tell us and what we read in the paper. But learn to look at your place objectively and believe in what you're seeing with your own eyes.
Thank you. Wonderful advice. Sam?
I'd say do your absolute utmost to try freshen up your perspective. Look at things without your sort of old biases. Be patient. Like I said, I'll give something a year before I'll make a fair assessment. I mean, John's talking about 3 years. I think it's probably our first 2 years of our journey, we had 2 massive droughts, and that put the big question mark on things. And I'm so glad we saw those through, because otherwise, now I can see, why, the power of unleashing the biological system, and also, get sound advice as well. I think it's money well spent. Find someone you trust and someone that's been through the journey, because there is so much information in this space, and it can be quite overwhelming.
And plenty of people in this room as a starting point for that, right? Plenty of consultants and advisors here. Willie?
Yeah, I'll keep it really succinct. I'd say the best advice would be to leave your ego at the door, because production is for vanity and profit is for sanity, and there's never a truer word spoken, I don't think.
Can you say that again?
Production is for vanity, and profit is for sanity.
Haven't heard that one before. Thank you. Well, give them all a round of applause, everybody. So we have 10 or 12 minutes for questions. Again, before you ask your question, I do invite you to have a bit of a discussion at your table. It might help you to fine-tune your questions. And we'll be putting first people who haven't put forward a question yet. Just letting you know that. So a couple of minutes, and then we'll take your questions. Okay, have you got your questions written down? Just let me see how many questions roughly we have. If you could put your hands up. There's one. There's two. Okay. There's three. So, as mentioned, I will be taking questions from those who haven't so far asked a question first, and then if we've got time, those who already have can raise their hand. Dave, are you ready with your roving eye and your roving mic? Excellent. So your question may be just to one panellist or it may be to more. That's over to you. So first hand up was somebody in the middle where, yes, the gentleman, Dave, he's yours.
Is it working? Okay. Dr. Charles Massey in Australia did research around regenerative agriculture, and he said that it took about an average of 3 years to convert from conventional to regenerative. I'm just wondering if you guys are finding that timeline about the same.
I'd argue it might be a wee bit longer. I mean, most things, if you start something, whether it be a business or a skill or a relationship even, it takes about 4.5 years to get where you thought you were when you started. I mean, that's I think that's most people's experience. That's why your apprenticeships are 5 years long. That's why when you go and do a degree, it's 3 to 4 years long. It's almost in that same space. So I think the thing is that people think they're going to charge in, it's going to all work for you, but it doesn't. The reality is that you might get lucky. But like I said, the drama is that you've got to develop experience over time. I've met farmers that have had disasters going into regen stuff, and other guys that have had an absolutely whizzer of a time. And a lot of it just depends on farmer experience and their skill level.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to respond?
I think it depends big time as well. Also, where you're coming from and where your soils are coming from. Whether you've been slamming them with chemicals and synthetic fur, or if you've sort of already weaned yourself off those things, it can make a massive difference. For me, our farm, I'd say, was sort of where I expected it to be in 3 years, where I expected to be in 5 years, if you know what I mean. So it's 2 years faster than as a family, we thought it would be. But then you do hear some wonder stories of people, basically cutting out a couple of 100 kilos of urea overnight and not seeing much of a difference in their system, which is, I can't give you the answer why those wonder systems work, but it's possible to be really fast.
Thanks, Sam. Willie?
I'd just say that, we're still early days through our journey and we're nowhere near reaching any kind of optimum in terms of soil health development and stuff like that. But I think, the key thing is, to keep it relatively simple to start with. One of the things I observed doing the due diligence on going down this path was actually the guys that had kind of committed to that organic certification earlier on, because they kind of just thought, well, it's a no-brainer, I'm going to be running my system within or close enough to within those confines, that we may as well just start that 3-year process now. And I just think that simplified it. There was a lot of things that were then off the table, and it's counterintuitive, but that restrictive framework actually probably allowed them to have a more open mind about the way they need to farm and work with nature and all the rest of it. So, and it also just brings the most important part, I believe, of the whole thing, and that's it's finding a low-cost system. I think, to me, that's the biggest challenge we've got as a wider industry is, and this year and last year, to a certain extent, a very good example of chasing those marginal costs up with commodity price cycles and getting caught sort of when they inevitably drop. But yeah, if you can reduce your costs, and for us it was actually a halving of our farm working expenses over a 2-year period, then that just provides that level of robustness that looks after the financial thing, and that's the key, right? The thing that's going to trip you up if you have a really poor financial year, and it's going to put you off forever. So really got to focus on that cost reduction.
Thanks, Willie. The other two people who had their hands up before, there's one here, and where's the other one? Okay, if we can take Dave, the gentleman over here, and then back to this person. Thank you.
Hi guys, Colin Tyler. So I am lucky enough to farm just up the road from Willie. I'm from a more of a conventional farming background, and one thing I'd probably say is that not every conventional farmer does care about the environment, but there's stuff everyone can learn. Probably to Willie and Sam, if you were going to give some advice to a more conventional or traditional farmer about what you've learnt from your program, what would be the couple of things that you'd probably advise them to do?
I'd just rethink. I guess rethink the important minerals in soil, and don't just look at what Ravensdown and Balance are testing for. Try get a lab that specialises in soil biology, and so you can be looking at your calciums and your magnesiums and your potassium and all your trace minerals rather than just focusing on NPK. The other piece I'd say is just try find low-cost ways to get some diversity across your farm, and that might be just broadcasting some small seeds with your fert in the truck, and that's a really, really cheap way to unleash a bit of diversity, and also just just have a crack, maybe half a paddock or something like that, and next time you're regrassing, and get the whole mix in there with some annuals in there, and treat it as a crop, and see that transition, and just watch the power of a diverse species pasture, and see it through the seasons, and see that sort of morph, and just how amazing it is. I think every it happens every year. I'm sort of like, okay, well, let me try this paddock. It's not going so well. What's going to happen if I put diversity into there? And every paddock I've done that in has improved out of sight. And it's, I guess you can get caught up thinking, oh, this is just a terrible paddock, and it'll always be a terrible paddock, but there may just be like a missing link, or there may be some potential remediation that toxic remediation that needs to happen through that diverse soil community for it to then really function, rather than just seeing it as a shit paddock and thinking, oh, we're always going to have to put on more fertiliser onto that paddock or something like that. So yeah, that's probably what I'd say in a nutshell.
Thanks, Sam. Willie, anything to add?
Nah, not a lot really, but just start with some small management changes really, and see what difference you can see in terms of, most of us are running rotational grazing systems, so yeah, try and look at the difference in recovery times and stuff, and see what kind of observations you make around animal performance, and or not necessarily performance, but how observing how they are behaving, I'd probably just, for me it's a big one, but yeah, I'd always come back to just looking at all those those costs in your business and whether or not they're actually providing a return, and can you run a lower intensity system more profitably? Because on average, I think most New Zealand farmers could.
Thank you. And sorry, but this will be our final question, although after this discussion finishes, we're going into a tea break, and I think all of our panellists will still be around, so you feel free to approach them individually. But here comes the last question.
James Powery, I'm CEO of Hawke's Bay Forestry Group, which represents the forest growing companies of Hawke's Bay. My question is around, and I was happy to hear your comment about planting a tree is a good idea, John, but one's probably not enough. Just the excitement around carbon's pretty obvious because there's a price to it, but what we see with a healthy forest is an engine of cooling that relates to water vapour and all of those microorganisms pumping warmth into the atmosphere and cooling the place by other means. So just balancing that excitement about carbon because it's a valuable commodity, but the other services around cooling that come from a healthier system. So probably John first, but others too.
Yeah, it's, I think farmers and growers, there's a huge opportunity to be promoting the benefits of the public good you can create through ecosystem services. If we had more time, I'd do a little demonstration with this entire audience about that. But the thing is that if Peter earlier on was talking about the soil carbon, a buzzword you should be using a lot more with people is the carbon sponge in the soil. And I think that's something that you should be promoting. I think there's a lot of other services we could be going into that farmers have an opportunity, I think, to create and to be financially rewarded for, particularly by councils, because if they're providing something that's a public good, then I believe that as a group of farmers, you should be going down and knocking on the council's door and going, we've got a deal for you. Why don't you, this is what we're providing in terms of public good because of our environmental services. Maybe you can give us a rates rebate. I think that there's an opportunity for that. I know what the councils would say to that, but I think there's an opportunity for that to get that. There'd be an interesting dialogue to start happening here.
Thanks. Anyone else want to respond? Paul?
We are getting closer to soil carbon projects here with Steve's method. I've been saying this since 2008, so I don't want to get you too excited about it, but we are quite close on a couple of projects at the moment. So watch this space, I guess. But just in general, about regene farming, it wasn't the question, but there's a whole range of activity. It's a spectrum, isn't it? And I'm on farms all the time, John is as well, but you see a whole lot of people doing, whether they'd call themselves conventional, regenerative, or good or bad, a whole lot of people doing a whole range of things on farms, and some of them pretty good on what you'd call farming pretty conventionally, just by growing bigger pasture covers and paying attention to the way that they're farming, being careful about it.
Thank you. Sam or Willie, anything to add? All right. Well, thank you all for your questions. Thanks again to the panellists. Let's give them another round of applause.